Clara once believed in the promises she made at the altar, for better or worse, in sickness and in health. They were words spoken with trembling hands and a heart full of devotion. Beside her, Ethan had looked every bit the man she thought she knew, strong, confident, and steady. Together, they had built a life that appeared enviable to the outside world. Family photos framed the walls, neighbors admired their laughter, and their smiles shone through every holiday card. But Clara had learned that a vow could be both a bond and a chain. It was in the small silences that she first noticed the shift. Ethan's hand would linger just a moment too long on his phone when she entered the room. He would nod absently when she spoke, his eyes drifting elsewhere. He still kissed her cheek when he left for work, still said "love you" in the doorway, but the words had grown thinner, like paper soaked and torn. At night, when he came home later than usual, he carried with him a tension he never explained. He smiled through it, polished and perfect, but Clara could feel the distance like a wall forming between them. The man she had sworn her life to was both present and unreachable, a stranger lying beside her. She told herself every marriage had seasons, that love required patience. But even as she whispered reassurances in the mirror, she couldn't shake the gnawing unease in her chest. It wasn't jealousy, not exactly. It was fear, though she couldn't name what she was afraid of. One evening, as the wind rattled against the windows, she caught Ethan staring at her across the dinner table, his fork unmoving, his gaze too sharp to be casual. When she asked if something was wrong, he smiled as though nothing at all was amiss. The answer soothed nothing. Clara cleared the dishes that night with trembling hands, realizing something inside her marriage had shifted, something she could not yet see but felt tightening around her like invisible rope. And in that silence, she wondered how long vows could hold before they broke. The quiet moments between Clara and Ethan had grown louder than words. She began to notice how often his chair at the dinner table sat empty, how many nights the bed felt colder on his side. "Work," he would say, loosening his tie with an easy smile, brushing a kiss against her cheek before disappearing again into the night. At first, Clara believed him. Ethan had always been ambitious, the kind of man who chased success with tireless energy. But lately, his excuses sounded rehearsed, his smiles too polished. The truth, she feared, lived somewhere in the gaps between his words. One evening, Clara sat in the living room with the television humming low, waiting for him. Hours passed. She dozed off against the cushions, only to wake to the faint creak of the front door. Ethan entered quietly as though hoping not to disturb her. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair disheveled, but his smile was intact. "Still awake?" he asked softly. Clara nodded, swallowing the questions pressing against her lips. She told herself to be patient, to trust. Yet when he kissed her forehead, the taste of distance lingered. The following week, the pattern repeated. Ethan vanished after dinner, his explanations growing thinner. Clara stopped pretending not to notice. She began pacing the hallway when he left, her hands trembling as she stared at the clock. And one night, the silence broke. She had gone downstairs for a glass of water when she heard it. Ethan's voice, low and urgent, drifting from the kitchen. The glow of his phone lit his face as he stood near the counter, speaking to someone she could not see. Clara froze in the shadows, her bare feet cold against the tiles. "She doesn't know," Ethan whispered. Clara suspects nothing. Her breath caught in her throat. His tone was soft but sharp, threaded with a secrecy that hollowed her chest. She leaned closer, straining to hear, but a floorboard creaked beneath her weight. Ethan stiffened, glancing over his shoulder. By the time Clara stepped into the kitchen, he had ended the call, sliding his phone into his pocket with practiced ease. "Can't sleep?" he asked casually, pouring water into a glass as though nothing had happened. His eyes held hers a moment too long, searching, measuring. Clara forced a smile, though her heart thundered. Just thirsty. Later, lying awake beside him, she replayed the whisper in her mind. She doesn't know. The words clawed at her, and for the first time, Clara realized the silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of secrets. Clara's suspicion gnawed at her day after day. The whisper she overheard, "She doesn't know," echoed like a curse. She began watching Ethan more closely, following the rhythm of his movements through their home. That was when she noticed it. how often he disappeared into his study, and how quickly he locked the door behind him. The study had always been Ethan's domain, a room of dark wood and leather-bound books, lined with order that seemed almost obsessive. Clara rarely entered, but one afternoon when he was at work, she pushed open the door. Dust motes swirled in the light that spilled across the desk, and for a moment, everything seemed ordinary. Then she saw it, tucked low on a shelf, partially hidden behind folders. A wooden box, its surface scratched and worn, a small lock sealing it shut. Clara crouched, her pulse quickening. The lock was simple, nothing that couldn't be pried. She hesitated, her hands trembling. Opening it felt like a betrayal, but leaving it closed felt worse. Her breath shallow, she fetched a thin screwdriver from the kitchen drawer and returned, kneeling on the floor. Each twist of the metal sent her nerves sparking. The lock gave way with a faint click, the lid creaking open. Inside lay a stack of receipts, gas stations, motels, convenience stores from towns Ethan had never mentioned, several bore dates that aligned with his so-called business trips. Beneath them were photographs. Clara's hand clamped over her mouth. The images were grainy, taken at night, but they were unmistakable. Women, faces partially obscured, captured from a distance. In some, the women appeared unaware. In others, fear flickered in their expressions, as if they knew someone was watching. Clara's chest constricted. She wanted to slam the box shut, to erase what she had seen. But her eyes were drawn to one last photograph at the bottom. This one was clearer, a woman with dark hair smiling faintly at the camera. Her location a wooded trail Clara recognized. The sound of the front door jolted her upright. Panic surged. She shoved the photographs and receipts back inside, fumbling to force the lid closed. She slid the box into its place just as Ethan's footsteps echoed down the hallway. "Clara?" His voice carried easily through the house, calm, casual. Yet her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She forced a steady tone. "In here," she called, brushing dust from her palms. When Ethan appeared in the doorway, his smile was smooth, but his eyes seemed sharper than usual. He glanced briefly at the shelf before meeting her gaze. "Everything all right?" Clara nodded quickly, too quickly. Her heart thudded as his gaze lingered. That night, lying in bed, Clara replayed the images again and again. Doubt clawed at her, but so did certainty. Whatever Ethan was hiding, it was far worse than she had ever imagined. Clara could no longer contain the storm building inside her. The image of the hidden box, the receipts, the grainy photographs. Every detail gnawed at her until she finally confronted Ethan one evening after dinner. The clink of cutlery faded into silence as she looked across the table and whispered, "What are you hiding from me?" Ethan's fork paused midair. His brow furrowed for the briefest moment before he broke into a soft laugh. "Clara, what on earth are you talking about?" Her voice wavered, but she pressed on. "Your study, the box. I saw—" Before she could finish, he leaned back, crossing his arms with an almost amused expression. "So you've been snooping now?" "That explains your mood. I should have known." His tone was calm, gentle even, but beneath it Clara felt the sting of accusation. "I'm not snooping," she said, her chest tightening. "I found things that don't make sense. Places you never told me you went." "Photos," Ethan interrupted, shaking his head with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Photos, receipts? Clara, do you realize how paranoid you sound? You've been under a lot of stress lately. Maybe you're seeing things that aren't there." The words sank like stones into her chest. For a moment, she doubted herself. Had the shadows in the photographs distorted her mind? Had the storm outside made her imagine the stains on those papers? Ethan reached across the table, his hand brushing over hers, tender in appearance but heavy with control. "You know I love you. But if you keep inventing problems, you'll only drive yourself crazy. Is that what you want?" Clara bit back tears. His tone was so convincing, his eyes so steady, that part of her wanted to believe him. Yet the memory of the woman's face in the photograph burned too vividly. Later that week, at a neighborhood dinner party, Ethan slipped seamlessly into his public mask. He charmed the room with stories, made everyone laugh, and pulled Clara close to him like a devoted husband. To the world, they looked perfect, but under the table, his grip on her wrist tightened whenever she drifted into silence. When they returned home, Ethan's smile vanished like a light switched off. He closed the door, turning to her with a voice edged in steel. Don't embarrass me again. People see what I want them to see. Remember that." Clara nodded, but inside her resolve hardened. The box wasn't a dream, the photographs weren't illusions, and soon, someone else would confirm that she wasn't losing her mind. Clara hadn't spoken to Julia in nearly a decade. Yet when their paths crossed again, it felt like fate had stepped in. She spotted her in line at a small cafe one morning, her auburn hair unmistakable even after all these years. Clara hesitated, unsure if she wanted to reconnect, but Julia turned and their eyes met. Recognition lit her face, followed by a warm smile. "Clara? Oh my God, it's been forever." They sat together at a corner table, their conversation at first light, nostalgic. They traded memories of old college days, the kind where everything seemed simpler and safer. For a brief while, Clara felt like herself again. Not the woman swallowed by suspicion and silence. But when Julia asked about her life now, about Ethan, Clara's throat tightened. "You're married?" Julia asked, eyes flicking to Clara's wedding band. "Yes," Clara said softly. 6 years now. To Ethan Harrison, the color drained from Julia's face. Her smile faltered. She leaned back in her chair as if struck. "Ethan Harrison," she repeated, her voice quiet but heavy. Clara frowned. "You know him?" Julia's hand trembled as she lifted her coffee cup. She hesitated before speaking. Her words weighed with reluctance. "Clara, I dated Ethan back in college. It didn't last long, but—" She exhaled sharply. "I should have told someone then. He wasn't right. There were moments where he was possessive, controlling. At first it felt flattering, like passion. But then it turned into something darker." Clara's pulse quickened. "What do you mean, darker?" Julia's gaze lowered. "If I so much as talked to another guy, he'd explode. Once he followed me home in the middle of the night because he didn't believe where I said I'd been. He could be charming, but when the mask slipped..." Her voice cracked. "I was scared of him, Clara. Really scared." Clara felt the world tilt. Julia's words pressed against the images still seared in her memory. The box, the photos, Ethan's whispers in the kitchen. Her stomach churned. "I left before it escalated," Julia continued, her eyes glistening. "But you're his wife now. If he's still the same man..." She reached across the table, gripping Clara's hand. "Be careful." "Promise me." Clara nodded, though her body shook. Confirmation, real, spoken, undeniable, settled over her like ice. She wasn't imagining the darkness. That evening when she returned home, Ethan greeted her with his familiar smile. But Clara saw it differently now. Not love, not warmth, but a mask stretched tight. And behind it, she feared, lived the same monster Julia had described. The evening after Clara's unsettling reunion with Julia, the house felt unbearably still. Ethan sat across from her at the dinner table, smiling as though nothing in the world could touch them. Yet Clara's mind replayed Julia's words on a loop, each one chipping away at the facade of their marriage. It was nearly midnight when the knock came. Sharp, deliberate, echoing through the hall like a summons. Clara startled, setting down her glass. Ethan glanced at her, his brow tightening for the briefest moment before he rose to answer. On the porch stood a tall man in a dark coat, his presence heavy even before he spoke. "Mr. Harrison?" "Detective Ryan Cole. Sorry for the late visit." He flashed a badge, his tone polite but edged with authority. "I'd like to ask you a few questions." Ethan's smile returned instantly, polished and confident. "Of course, Detective. Please, come in." Clara lingered in the doorway of the living room as the two men sat across from each other. Cole flipped open a small notebook. "We're reviewing some unresolved disappearances in the area. Several women went missing near towns you've recently visited. Madison, Glenfield. Does that sound familiar?" Clara's breath caught. Those names matched the receipts she had seen in the wooden box. Ethan chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Detective, I travel for work often. Business takes me everywhere. If my name appears in a logbook or receipt, that hardly makes me a suspect." Cole's eyes never left him. "Of course. Still, you'll understand why I have to ask. Witnesses place a man of your description near Crestview Trail the week one of the women vanished." Clara's stomach twisted. Crestview Trail, the same path Ethan jogged in the mornings. She pressed a hand against the wall to steady herself. Ethan leaned forward, calm and unflinching. "A lot of men fit my description. You'll have to do better than that." His voice was measured, but Clara noticed the way his jaw clenched, the faint tension in his shoulders. Cole scribbled something down before standing. "We'll be in touch." His gaze flicked briefly toward Clara, softening for a moment as if he could sense her fear. When the door closed, Ethan turned back, his expression unreadable. Then with a smile too controlled, he said, "Don't let this get to you, Clara. They're fishing. Nothing more." But later, lying in bed beside him, Clara's heart refused to calm. If the police were circling, it meant there was something real to circle. And if Ethan was hiding what she feared, she might be sleeping beside a killer. The house felt unnervingly quiet after Detective Cole's visit. Clara lay in bed, staring into the darkness, every nerve on edge. Ethan's breathing beside her was steady, almost theatrical, as though he wanted her to believe he had nothing to hide. But silence stretched differently now. It was no longer peace, it was performance. Hours passed before Ethan stirred. He sat up suddenly, his silhouette sharp against the faint glow from the streetlight outside. Clara pretended to sleep, but his voice, low and raw, pulled her back into alertness. "Sometimes I wonder," he muttered, almost to himself, "what it would be like to be free." Clara's chest tightened. She shifted slightly, careful not to reveal she was awake. Ethan continued, his tone heavy with bitterness. "Marriage is just another kind of prison. Everyone thinks it's love, devotion, but it's chains. You lock yourself in, and the only way out is—" He trailed off, his voice thick with menace. "Breaking something," Clara's pulse hammered. She reached slowly beneath her pillow, fingers brushing against her phone. Her hand trembled as she unlocked the screen, pressing record. Each word he spoke might be her only weapon. Ethan laughed under his breath, a hollow, humorless sound. "You think I don't notice? The way you look at me, searching for cracks. But you'll never understand, Clara. I do what I must. Always have." Her throat ached with the effort of silence. He turned then, his gaze piercing through the darkness. "Do you know what it's like, carrying secrets that no one can ever know? To feel power in your hands and know others would crumble if they saw the truth?" His voice dropped lower, almost reverent. "It's intoxicating." Clara squeezed her eyes shut, feigning sleep as tears welled. Every instinct screamed to flee, to run out of the house barefoot if she had to. But the weight of his words pinned her in place. After a long pause, Ethan sighed, lying back down. "You'll never leave," he whispered. "You're too afraid. And that's why you'll always be mine." Minutes stretched into hours. Eventually, his breathing evened, slipping into sleep. Clara lay rigid, her phone clutched tight, the recording still running. She finally pressed stop, staring at the faint red dot on the screen with a mix of terror and relief. She had proof now, not just suspicion, not just whispers. His own voice, laced with menace, admitting enough to strip away the mask he wore so well. But proof was dangerous. If Ethan discovered what she had done, she wouldn't live to use it. As dawn's light crept through the blinds, Clara knew she had crossed a line. She could no longer pretend her marriage was salvageable. She was no longer just a wife. She was prey trapped in a hunter's home, and soon, the world outside would reveal just how deep Ethan's darkness ran. The morning news jolted Clara awake before she had even poured her first cup of coffee. The reporter's voice was steady, but the words struck like knives. "Body was discovered last night near Crestview. Trail? Authorities have not released a name, but confirm. The victim is a woman in her late 20s. Clara's hand froze around the mug. Crestview Trail, Ethan's jogging route. The same path he vanished to on countless mornings. Her stomach twisted violently, bile rising in her throat. She stared at the screen, unable to look away from the flashing image of yellow police tape stretched across the forest. The sound of footsteps startled her. Ethan entered the kitchen, freshly showered, his smile easy. He glanced at the TV, then at her. "Awful, isn't it?" His voice was calm, even sympathetic. "This world just keeps getting darker." Clara swallowed hard. "That's your trail," he shrugged, pouring himself coffee. "Lots of people use that trail. Doesn't mean I had anything to do with it." He said it so casually, so convincingly, that for a fleeting moment Clara almost questioned her fear. Almost. But she remembered his whispered confession in the dark. The photos in the wooden box, Julia's trembling warning. Everything connected too neatly. Later that day, Detective Cole arrived. His knock was firm, his presence heavier than before. Clara stood aside as he stepped into the living room, notebook in hand. Ethan greeted him with a bright smile, gesturing to the armchair like a gracious host. Cole's questions came sharp and deliberate. "Mr. Harrison, witnesses reported seeing you jogging near Crestview several mornings last week. Can you confirm that?" Ethan leaned back, sipping his coffee leisurely. "I jog there all the time, Detective. Good exercise. But I assure you, I never saw anything suspicious." Clara sat rigid on the edge of the sofa, watching the exchange with silent terror. She could feel Ethan's composure cracking in the faint tension around his jaw. The flicker in his eyes each time Cole pressed deeper. Finally, Cole closed his notebook, his gaze lingering on Clara. "If you remember anything at all, call me." His words hung heavier than the polite tone suggested. When the door closed behind him, Ethan turned, his smile reappearing like a mask slipping back into place. "See, they've got nothing, just questions. Don't let them rattle you, Clara." But that night, as she lay beside him, Clara stared into the darkness, her phone clutched beneath her pillow. The police were circling, the evidence mounting. Yet Ethan still smiled as though the world belonged to him. She realized then that the real danger wasn't only in what the police suspected. It was in what Ethan might do if he discovered how much she already knew. And soon, betrayal would cut closer than she ever imagined. Clara thought she had braced herself for every revelation. The body in the woods, the police questions, Ethan's whispers in the dark. None of it had broken her completely. But betrayal came from the place she least expected, and it sliced deeper than any fear of murder ever could. It began with a text. Ethan had left his phone on the nightstand while showering, the screen lighting up with a familiar name. Julia. Clara froze. Her heart hammered as she stared at the preview of the message. "Last night was perfect. I need you again." Her knees nearly buckled. Julia, the woman who had warned her, the friend who had claimed to be afraid of Ethan, wasn't just part of his past. She was entwined in his present. When Ethan came out, towel draped around his shoulders, he snatched the phone before she could move. His smile was thin, calculated. "Something wrong?" Clara's voice caught in her throat. "Julia, you're seeing Julia?" For a flicker of a second, the mask slipped. Then he laughed, low and mocking. "You really thought she came back into your life by accident?" "Clara, you're more naive than I imagined." Tears blurred her vision. The betrayal burned hot in her chest, not just from Ethan but from Julia too. The woman she had trusted, the one person she thought might understand, had been part of the lie all along. Later, Clara arranged to meet Julia, desperate for answers. They sat in the same cafe as before, but this time the warmth was gone. Julia's eyes darted away, her hands trembling as she stirred her drink. "You told me you were afraid of him," Clara whispered, her voice breaking. "You warned me, Julia, and now I find out you're in his bed?" Julia's lips parted, guilt flooding her face. "I didn't mean for it to happen. He said things made me believe. I thought I was different, that he loved me. But he always comes back to you. Don't you see? You're the anchor, Clara. He'll never let you go." The words hit like a death sentence. Clara staggered from the cafe, her chest constricting. Every secret, every lie, every manipulation was woven tighter now. She wasn't just trapped in Ethan's web, she was surrounded by it, with Julia caught inside too. That night, lying stiff in bed, Clara realized fear had given way to something darker, despair. She was married to a liar, bound to a man she could no longer trust, with betrayal closing in on every side. And the next time Ethan returned home late, she would finally see the truth written in blood. The house was cloaked in silence when Clara heard the faint scrape of the front door unlocking. She sat rigid on the sofa, the glow of a single lamp spilling across the room. It was past midnight, the hour when lies usually crept in. Ethan stepped inside, closing the door quietly behind him. His movements were careful, calculated. But what froze Clara's breath was his shirt, white fabric streaked with stains so dark they glistened under the light. Blood. Fresh. Her voice cracked in the stillness. "Ethan, what have you done?" He looked down almost casually, then back at her with a crooked smile. "Work accident," he murmured. "You wouldn't understand." Clara stood slowly, her hands trembling. That's not paint. That's not an accident. Tell me the truth. Something shifted in his expression. The mask he wore, the charm, the calm, slipped like a curtain tearing. His eyes darkened, his voice dropping to a chilling whisper. You really want the truth? Clara's chest tightened. Yes. Ethan stepped closer, the metallic scent of blood thick between them. Our marriage, it's never been about love. It's about control, about appearance. Do you know how perfect we look to everyone? You, the loyal wife. Me, the successful husband. Nobody suspects a thing. Tears blurred Clara's vision. So every vow, every promise, a performance, he said flatly. And you've been my greatest shield. When the police come knocking, who do they see? A happy couple. A devoted wife. You've given me the perfect alibi for years. Clara's stomach lurched, rage and terror colliding. You've used me. Ethan's laugh was low, cold. Of course. That's what marriage is, Clara. A transaction. You protect me and I give you the illusion of safety. But don't mistake it for freedom. You'll never leave. He reached out, smearing a streak of blood across her cheek with his fingertips. Clara flinched, but he leaned in close, his voice cutting like a blade. If you ever betray me, if you ever whisper to anyone what you think you know, you'll end up just like them. Her heart pounded so violently she thought it might burst. Every instinct screamed to run, but fear anchored her. She forced herself to meet his gaze, her voice barely steady. And what if the mask breaks, Ethan? What then? For a moment, silence swallowed the room. Then his smile returned, sinister and unshaken. It won't. Not while you're here to hold it in place. He disappeared upstairs, leaving a trail of blood on the floorboards. Clara sank against the wall, her body trembling. She had proof in her recordings, but now she had something worse. Certainty. Ethan was no longer a suspicion, no longer a shadow in her imagination. He was a killer hiding in plain sight, and if she wanted to survive, she needed a plan before his mask shattered completely. Clara's decision crystallized in the dead of night, as she lay trembling beside Ethan's sleeping form. The bloodstains on his shirt were no longer just evidence. They were a promise of what he was capable of. If she stayed silent, she would eventually join the nameless women in the woods. If she acted, there was a chance, slim but real, that she could break free. The next morning, with her heart pounding, she reached out to Detective Cole. Her message was brief. Typed with shaking fingers, I can get him to confess. Come tonight, listen, by dusk the house was staged. Clara prepared dinner as if nothing were wrong, her face calm, her hands steady. She left the vent in the dining room slightly open, knowing Cole would be waiting outside with a recorder. Every detail of her performance had to be perfect. Ethan could smell fear like blood in the water. When Ethan arrived home, his smile was as polished as ever. He kissed her cheek, poured himself a glass of wine, and settled at the table. You've been quiet today, he said, studying her closely. Clara forced a small smile. Just thinking about us, about everything we've been through. His eyes narrowed slightly, suspicious, but curiosity won. And what conclusions did you come to? She took a slow breath, steadying herself. That sometimes I feel like I don't even know you. That maybe our marriage isn't what it seems. Ethan chuckled, leaning back in his chair. Finally, some honesty. Go on. Her voice trembled, but she pushed forward. You told me once I was your shield. That our marriage was a cover. What did you mean? For a long moment, Ethan said nothing. Then with a cruel smile, he leaned forward. You still don't get it, do you? Every lie I told, every trip, every stain you tried to scrub away, it was all part of who I am. And you've been my alibi, my perfect stage prop. As long as you played your role, I could be anything I wanted out there. Clara's heart raced, but she nodded, feigning fascination. And the body they found? His eyes glittered. A mistake. Should have buried her deeper. But it doesn't matter. They'll never tie it to me, not with you by my side. At that moment, the knock on the door thundered through the room. Ethan froze, realization dawning too late. Detective Cole entered with 2 officers, his voice steady. We've heard enough, Mr. Harrison. Ethan's face contorted, fury replacing charm. He turned to Clara, betrayal burning in his eyes. You set me up. Clara's hands shook, but her voice held steady. No, Ethan, you set yourself up. As the officers dragged him away, Ethan's shouts echoed through the house. Clara sank into her chair, her body trembling but her spirit unbroken. The mask was gone. The monster was revealed. The courtroom air was heavy when the verdict came down. Guilty. The word reverberated like a church bell, final and merciless. Ethan sat stone-faced at the defense table, his jaw tight, his eyes burning with the fury of a man who had lost control. For years he had manipulated, lied, and killed under the mask of a devoted husband. Now, stripped of charm and shackled at the wrists, he was just another predator caught in the light. Clara sat in the gallery, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Around her, people whispered about the evidence, about the horror of what Ethan had done. Some looked at her with pity, others with admiration. To them, she was the survivor, the woman who had turned the tide against a monster. But Clara felt none of their triumph. Justice was a word spoken in courtrooms, neat and contained. The reality was messier, a lifetime of scars no gavel could erase. Outside, cameras swarmed her. Journalists asked how it felt to be free, to know the nightmare was over. She offered only silence, retreating into the shadows of her own home. Freedom, she realized, was not the same as peace. Every corner of the house carried ghosts. The sofa where she had watched him smile through lies. The kitchen where she had overheard whispers meant to stay hidden. The bedroom where he had confessed, his voice thick with menace. Even the walls seemed to remember, humming with the weight of secrets. Nights were the worst. Clara would wake drenched in sweat, convinced she heard the creak of the front door. Ethan's footsteps approaching. Even locked away, his presence lingered, stitched into her nerves. She sometimes touched the faint scar where he had once gripped her wrist too hard. A reminder that love had been her cage. Months later, Clara agreed to one final interview, the closing segment of a true crime documentary that sought to tell her story. She sat beneath the glare of studio lights, her hands clasped tightly, her voice quiet but unwavering. "People ask me if I miss him," she said, her eyes focused just beyond the camera. "And the truth is, I miss the man I thought I married. But that man never existed. Ethan was a mask, and I built my life around it." Her voice trembled, but she continued. "They call me brave. They say I fought for justice, but justice doesn't bring back the years I lost. It doesn't silence the doubts that still live inside me. Love was supposed to protect me. Instead, it destroyed me." A long silence followed before she added softly, "Marriage was supposed to be till death do us part. In the end, it was. Not by my death, but by the death of everything I believed in." The camera lingered on her face, her eyes glistening before fading to black. Clara's story was over, but the echo of it, of vows twisted into chains, of love corrupted into terror, would haunt forever.